This is TWiT. I really want Tesla not only to survive, but to win. But you're right. When I think of, for instance, Ford and their former CEO, Alan Mulally, a complete opposite of Elon Musk. A guy who works well with people, who's smart but quiet, who doesn't get a lot of headlines. Does Tesla have a shot?
That's a complicated question to answer. Look, they have everything they need to have a extremely durable, small volume, premium.
There's
carbon.
A path forward, but it's not the path they're taking.
Exactly. So they need to stop with this, and I think the scary part, right, is that, and we haven't really talked about the stock, but like a lot of what they've been doing is also making decisions that are good for their stock, but not necessarily good for the company. And this sort of emphasis on hyper growth, that's a story that the investors buy. And so the stock goes up. And of course, that's good for Elon too, because he owns a lot of the stock. But sort of constantly growing at breakneck speed is also just not a good way to run a car business. And especially one that's sort of has the culture that Tesla has now. And after 15 years, your culture is what it is. It's not going to turn around overnight. But the question is, can Tesla sort of walk away from this story that they're going to just keep growing until they sell like every car in the world? I don't know. I mean, it
they may be
on who you ask.
They may be trapped by market expectations.
Yeah, that's the scary thing, because at the core, they've got great technology, and they got great design. They've got a lot of things that will make the first sort of new premium car brand of the 21st century. I mean, they deserve to be that. They have that. It's just the hubris that doesn't let them be happy with that, and doesn't let them see that they've had this profound impact on cars and the market and the industry without having to sell millions of cars.
They had a very bad quarter. They're losing a lot of money, but they're sitting on a decent amount of cash. They're not going to run out of money tomorrow. They've got the Model Y coming next year. They're working on a truck. You think they should put that stuff on the back burner and just try to make a better Model 3?
Yeah. I mean, so they have the Roadster and the Semi and like a pickup truck and a Model Y that I think are all basically supposed to come out next year. I think the Semi's been pushed back or whatever. But yeah, there's too much going on there. You have to focus on something. I think making a Model Y makes sense because it uses the Model 3 parts. Basically it's a very high parts commonality, which the Model X did not have, which is why the Model X was a disaster. One of the reasons it was a disaster. So I think the Roadster makes sense for them because that gets them back into that really high price,
the high
cutting
end
edge. Yeah, pushing the technology forward. That's not something that mass market car makers do. You have to do it in small volumes in order to really, really push.
It's kind of their R8.
That's what they're good at. Yeah. Well, but it's even a higher thing. So honestly, though, I think the really scary thing for Tesla, and we haven't had a lot of time to talk about this, is the autonomous vehicle, the full self-driving thing. I think that they are. And by the way, I have a podcast that's one of the bigger autonomous vehicle podcasts. I talk to people in sector all the time. I'm not just a metal bending guy. And I think that they are selling something that they can't deliver. And I think that it is already proving to be corrosive to Elon Musk's credibility, which is frankly Tesla's most important asset. And I think that that ultimately is, a lot of Tesla set itself up to be a confidence game, and I know that has associations with it. I'm not saying it's, they've always been fraudulent or whatever. I think people make some wild accusations about them, but they've certainly their stock price has depended on trust that like this guy can land a rocket on a barge, he can do whatever he says he's going to do. And the history shows that's not necessarily the case, but also just everything about autonomous drive technology and what we know about how it's being developed indicates that their entire strategy doesn't make sense, and that technically they don't have the sensors and the redundancy, a whole bunch of other things to actually make that. And so I think what the biggest challenge to Tesla right now is how do they painted themselves in this corner. Okay, maybe they deliver on it. I'm not saying there's no chance that they deliver on it, but I think that's going to make or break that company.
I feel like it was the same thing as the biological defense filter. It was a poorly named, it's basically adaptive cruise control and lane changing.
So that's autopilot.
Yeah. And they called it autopilot, which was probably poor choice. Consumer Reports says don't call it autopilot. But Elon's really gotten in trouble by basically insinuating, well, we'll have level 5 autonomy next year, and soon Tesla owners will be able to rent out their cars and make money on their cars because it'll just drive people around. And
he's not insinuating it. He's saying
it and
taking people's money. It is a fairy tale. And I think that it shows, right, that like he has this relationship with his fans where they just want to believe that he's magical.
We do.
Yeah. And so, they're going to have to figure out how that works. Like,
I believe he's magical, but I never took my hands off the wheel. And I disengaged all the time.
Yep.
I never treated it like, oh, I could take a nap. And it's irresponsible to imply that you could.
Yeah, and I think there's even technical aspects to it, right? So it doesn't have a driver monitoring system. Like Cadillac Super Cruise, there hasn't been a single crash, let alone a fatality.
Because it's watching you. It's looking at you.
It's watching you. And if you're not paying attention to the road, it doesn't let you use the system.
I tested it because I covered my eyes. I had to peek because I thought this is crazy. And the seat starts going like this. And I mean, this is how it should be.
Yep. And Elon just said, there were engineers who told the Wall Street Journal, well, it was because of cost. Right. They didn't want to add more cost. And of course, Elon Musk said, no, it's because the technology doesn't really work. And I'm like, wait a second. Like, you're this, you can land rockets on ships, but you can't make eye tracking, camera software work. Like,
there's a fine balance because you do have to sell the vision, right? There is this, you do have to be a salesman.
But I think you put the finger on it, is he was selling the vision. And what autopilot always was sort of like, so in 2013, Google had an offer to buy them. And it wasn't until after that where they canceled the deal because they paid off the government loan. Their stock went crazy and they said, we don't need you, Google, anymore. But like right after that, that's when Elon started talking about autopilot. Yeah. And if you look back at what he said, it was about, well, we can do about 90% of what Google's going to do with stuff that we can just put on the car now and that you can afford. Whereas Google is saying it's going to be, really expensive cars and you're just going to have to share them. And so he has sold the appearance of autonomous drive, a simulacrum of autonomy. And he's walked this line between, at first it was like self-driving cars are here. When that first launched, there were all these headlines about self-driving cars are here. And then when people started to die, then it was like, oh, no, it's actually just a driver assistance system. And the story's constantly changing. But you'll notice that once they had to start saying, oh, no, it's just a driver assist system, that's when they said, okay, in 2016, starting now, every car has a hardware for full self-driving. And if you pay us
$5,000 for something that doesn't exist.
That's what makes their business, to the extent that their business works, it's that profit from from software basically that they still haven't even delivered.
3 years I had a Model X and never once used Summit. I didn't dare. I didn't want it. I didn't know what's going to happen. I mean, you press a button, your car comes out of your garage and pulls up and says, "Get in." I'm not going to use. I didn't even use the auto park, and that's a well understood technology in many vehicles. But I didn't even use.
Yeah, but it also doesn't work well in Tesla. I mean, Tesla doesn't even have like good blind spot monitoring.
The sensors are terrible. The Falcon Wing kept hitting my wife.
Yeah,
we actually got to the point where we said, she said, "Look, you may not close the doors until you say, 'Is everybody inside? Or your hands and feet inside the vehicle? I am now closing the doors, okay?'" Yeah. Twice it hit her in the head.
Better blind spot monitoring, which I think is a fantastic, driver assistance system. You get a better one in a $15,000,
absolutely,
Toyota Corolla.
I get the top-down camera. I can see what's all around me. Yeah, no, absolutely. By the way, the podcast, Ed's podcast, is called Autonocast. It's at autonocast.com.
Autonocast,
Yep. And I think this is a fascinating subject, but we are farther off than anybody admits, don't you think?
Yeah, and that's the really interesting thing is that, well, so now most autonomous drive development companies are admitting that it's farther off, and they're dialing back their deadlines or their target dates for deployment, and they're talking down, all this sort of hypey rhetoric. Yeah. And the one exception to that is Elon Musk,
of course,
and Tesla, and they are keeping their foot on that hype button, or whatever, the hype pedal. And I think that I just don't see how they can keep doing it. I don't. I mean, again, maybe he, maybe there is some fundamental breakthrough that nobody else in the sector, because it's not just me. My opinions on autonomous drive technology obviously don't come from personal experience. They come from talking to people who are working in this space. And of course, every Tesla fan says, oh, well, they're a competitor, so of course they're going to say he sucks. And there's not a situation where 85-90% of people in one business all are like, no, that guy is crazy. That's not just random talking shit about your competitors.
But at the same time, I think Elon justifies it in his mind. You got to think big. You got to put. This is the Silicon Valley way, and I think this is what you talk about throughout the book, and what really the thesis is. There's cars, and then there's Silicon Valley, and the Silicon Valley way, which is to talk big. We're going to have that next year. But that's not a vehicle that's transporting people at 60 miles an hour down a freeway. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect. Yep. And I understand that.
And like a Ferrari, if you buy a Ferrari, and it breaks or whatever, it's okay. It goes with the territory. You're buying something that's
what
on
you're
the
getting.
Cutting edge.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you're replacing your Honda Accord with a Model 3, then that's when you get the problem.